It is now illegal to deadname a trans person in Colorado. Finally, good news for trans people. None of this is forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to.
Another day, another insane law being pushed in the name of trans rights. We're going to break down the latest crazy law coming out of the state of Colorado purporting to advance trans rights, but actually undermining the First Amendment. Plus, the big, beautiful bill heads to the Senate, and a report highlights the controversial side of Trump's immigration policies. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across the internet, our media, and our politics, all from an independent perspective. So for our first story, we've got to check in on Colorado, the very blue, heavily Democratic-controlled state where they're doing some stuff that, honestly, guys, this is getting dystopian. Take a listen to this reporting from 9 News about a bill that was just signed into law by Colorado Governor Jared Polis that means misgendering is illegal now?
A bill creating new protections for transgender people will soon become law. Democratic Governor Jared Polis signed the Kelly Loving Act today, named after a transgender woman killed in the Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs. This legislation expands the state's definition of discrimination to include intentionally refusing to use someone's preferred name. Also makes it easier for somebody to change their name on legal documents. The bill had been watered down. It now excludes language that would have had courts consider a parent's refusal to recognize their child's transgender identity in custody battles.
So it is a good thing that one of the controversial parts of this bill that I talked about on the show some weeks ago, where they were actually going to make it a form of custody dispute relevant factor if you didn't use your child's preferred pronouns, including like neo-pronouns and the lot, they were going to hold that against you in custody disputes, potentially taking people's kids away because they wouldn't affirm controversial notions of gender identity that are not really rooted in science in many cases, which was of course insane, and no better way to cause outrage and alarm people than to go after parents' rights. So I was glad that was stripped out of the bill, but what we're left with is still a pretty remarkably radical and, in my view, obviously unconstitutional piece of legislation signed into law by moderate Governor Jared Polis. This law classifies misgendering, referring to somebody by the pronouns that are not the pronouns they prefer. So, for example, referring to a trans woman as he and him, referring to their biology rather than their preferred and stated identity, and deadnaming, use somebody's old name after they have declared that they prefer to be called a new name or even legally change their name, which you can do. Well, the new bill classifies these things in places of public accommodation, such as restaurants, bars, retail stores, and in housing and employment as illegal forms of discrimination. That means in these contexts, it's essentially illegal for employees to refuse to use the preferred pronouns of a person who identifies as transgender or even non-binary, or even on the surface. This law seems to suggest that if somebody goes by neo-pronouns and demands to be called slugs, then it would be illegal for somebody in a place of public accommodation to not do that and go along with that now under this law. The only exceptions included are for the name portion if it includes offensive language, which is very vague, or if it's being requested for frivolous purposes, which again is very vague, and then no exceptions at all are included for the pronouns. So forget the term preferred pronouns. In the state of Colorado, they're now mandatory pronouns, at least in some contexts. This news is actually being celebrated by some trans activists and TikTok influencers, like this one video where interesting points were made. Take a listen.
It is now illegal to deadname a trans person in Colorado. House Bill 1312, also known as the Kelly Loving Act, is finally good news for trans people. The bill was named to honor Kelly Loving, a trans woman who was shot and killed in the 2022 Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs. This law makes it illegal to deadname trans people in formal settings such as workplaces or schools. It also makes it significantly easier for Coloradoians to... Coloradoians. It makes it easier for people from Colorado to change their names and their gender markers on their birth certificates, marriage certificates, and driver's licenses. This law will also allow students to choose whatever uniform they want to if they go to a school that requires a uniform, which means that anyone can wear a boy's uniform and anyone can wear a girl's uniform. What would the non-binary uniform be? It would be entirely fog. You're gonna show up to school looking like the Loch Ness Monster. But I would also like to point out that good news for trans people is just being able to be yourself. None of this is forcing somebody to do something that they don't want to. It's just giving people, and like everybody, this applies to everybody, not just trans people. It just gives everybody more security in being who they are. Think about that. This is a W.
So the reason I had to include this video was because it got like 500,000 views, and lots of people were positively lapping this up in the comments, but it's just so obviously incoherent. You just described a bill making it illegal to dissent. Other people are being forced by the power of the government to affirm your pronouns and affirm your name choice and your identity, to agree to messages and ideas conveyed by the usage of those words that they may not agree with internally or may contradict their fundamentally held values and beliefs. And you're saying, this takes nothing from nobody. This harms nobody. It's just people getting to live their lives. No, that's the very problem. I've always thought you should be free to call yourself whatever you want. You should be free to ask other people to call you whatever you like. And then it should be up to them to decide whether they want to do that, because that's just what it means to live in a free society with freedom of speech protected by the First Amendment, rather than having the government force you to affirm a very radical and very new set of beliefs like this. But to actually describe this legislation and then come to the conclusion just seconds later, because this is a pretty short video, that it's not forcing anyone to do anything is bizarre. Like, are we not teaching basic reading comprehension and critical thinking adequately in schools anymore? Because how you can, maybe you still support it, we can have that debate, but how you can come to that conclusion after just contradicting yourself like 30 seconds before is kind of jaw-dropping, even by the abysmally low standards and expectations that I have for TikTok political commentary. So we should just be honest about what this law is. It is very obviously an attempt to have the government, the state government in Colorado, put its thumb on one side of the scale, to basically use the power of the state to force people to adopt one side of a hot, contested, ongoing debate about the meaning of sex and gender in society, and if anything, embrace and affirm a pretty minority viewpoint, I think it's fair to say, on some of this stuff. By mandating that skeptics use people's pronouns or names, even when they're stretched to the point of absurdity, they are forcing you to affirm a belief system against your will. And some supporters of this might try to deny that, but imagine the opposite. Imagine it was illegal for you to use your preferred pronouns, or it was illegal for your friends to call you what you like to be called. I'm pretty sure you would see it then, how that violates your kind of fundamental rights to free expression and freedom of conscience and beliefs. It's the same thing applied in reverse, guys. This is just basic 1 + 1 = 2 stuff when it comes to the philosophy of rights and coexistence. And the advocates behind this law really weren't very shy that their intention was to do exactly this, to silence the opposition, to force their viewpoint onto others through the power of the government. For example, a state lawmaker named Representative Lorena Garcia said, "This bill is the bare minimum of what we can do as a state, and the fact that we have to legislate for people to not bully and misgender and deadname people because of whatever insecurities they might have is sad to me. Why can't we just respect one another? Why can't we just understand that someone else's identity has nothing to do with me or you? It has nothing to do with me or you, but you're legally forcing us to embrace and affirm it and participate in it. So clearly it has something to do with us." And I'm sorry, but people might disagree with some of this stuff for reasons other than their own insecurities. And I understand that Representative Garcia thinks that it's respectful to use people's pronouns and preferred names and neo-pronouns or whatever, but respect is not legally mandated in a free country. And more importantly, people disagree about that. They disagree about what the respectful thing to do is. And guys, like, again, people have the freedom to say things you consider disrespectful. Have you read the First Amendment, my friend? It is First, in the Bill of Rights, for a reason. Some strident feminist types probably consider it very disrespectful for you to refer to biologically male people as a woman, as she/her. But they can't make that illegal, not in a free country, not without violating the First Amendment, because again, respect is to some degree in the eye of the beholder, and a lot of this stuff is subjective, hence why people should be allowed to decide for themselves. I mean, the state lawmakers, like Garcia, were very open about the idea that they're trying to legislate away people's right to disagree on this issue, but that's unconstitutional. Which is why a coalition of concerned groups is suing the state of Colorado and challenging this legislation, arguing that it violates the First and 14th Amendment because it explicitly engages in unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination and, quote, compels them to use language endorsing the state's view on highly contested and highly political matters of sex and gender. To me, the people filing this lawsuit are just obviously correct. Good people can reach different conclusions on how to best treat and handle situations where people have different gender identities or experience gender dysphoria, and they can decide for themselves whether they want to go along with pronoun usage in all contexts, in some contexts, or in no contexts. But that's the point. They can decide for themselves. And yes, even in a place of public accommodation. To me, it's just obviously extremely censorious overreach. And it's the government coming down firmly on one side of a contested social debate and trying to squeeze the other side out of public life and being able to express their opinions openly. That's just not allowed under our Constitution. And even if you're a pro-trans radical person who thinks every pronoun under the sun is valid, you shouldn't want the government to have that power, because that same exact power could be used in red states to make it illegal for people to use pronouns that are not corresponding with biology in places of public accommodation. Like, that shouldn't be a Pandora's box of government power that anybody wants to open. So I obviously think this law should be struck down. And it's really a remarkable reflection to me that even like moderate members of the Democratic Party, like Governor Jared Polis, are somehow all in on this kind of thing. But yeah, it's illegal. It's unconstitutional. And the courts, this is why they exist. And this is why it's important to uphold their legitimacy and follow their rulings. Yes, MAGA, I'm talking to you, at least some of you who have a problem with that on other issues, because they're there to uphold our rights. And in cases like this, it becomes obvious why that's so necessary and so important. Yet I just also have to stress to Democrats that set the law aside, set the Constitution aside for a moment. You're never going to win like this. You're never going to force and bully people into accepting your social agenda. This kind of approach, this comply or be crushed attitude of cancel, illegal, criminalize, punish, is only going to engender more resistance and more hostility and further inflame the culture war that is tearing this country apart. And I really struggle to understand how after the last several years, the last half decade of evidence, Democrats could still be going with this obviously counterproductive and divisive approach. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below, especially the Colorado people in my audience. I want to hear from y'all. And do make sure you hit that like button while you're at it. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet. Please do consider becoming a member of the channel and supporting my work, because my videos keep getting demonetized. I just turned that option on, so definitely check it out. And remember, you can send me voice notes for my Friday episodes with your woke horror stories or your personal situations where you need advice. I'm getting so many of those and loving going through them, and have so many good ones planned for this Friday. But now, let's talk politics, and let's check in on Washington, D.C., where the girls are fighting in the GOP, okay? They are not all getting along because the so-called big, beautiful bill, the Trump-blessed massive budget spending bill and tax cut bill that is moving through Congress, just passed the House, I think by just one single vote, which is like a razor-thin margin, and it goes to the Senate, where it faces similarly pretty tough prospects of getting through, but has to receive at least a bare majority of votes. It can go 50-50, and then the vice president gets to break the tie, so they need 50 votes to pass this. And you already have multiple Republican senators breaking with the president on this and speaking out against the big, beautiful bill for reasons that seem pretty straightforward to me. Here is Senator Ron Johnson, who is a reliable Trump Republican from Wisconsin, but is pretty outspoken here about not wanting to go along with this bill because it adds too much to the deficit and the debt, which Trump promised to entirely eliminate. Take a listen to what Ron Johnson had to say.
President Trump has suggested that the debt is not really top of mind of his concerns. He wants Republicans to fall in line. He wants Republicans to pass the bill. You told CNN, quote, somebody's got to be the dad that says, I know y'all want to go to Disney World, but we can't afford it. I guess I'm going to be that guy, unquote. So how determined are you to be that guy if it actually means telling President Trump you are going to vote against the bill and you're going to try to get other Republican senators to join you unless there are major, major changes?
Well, in 2010, I sprang out of the Tea Party movement, and as I did parades, I would shout, this is a fight for freedom. We are mortgaging our children's future. It's wrong. It's immoral. It has to stop. I haven't changed. My campaign promise in 2010 and every campaign after that was to stop mortgaging our children's future. It's immoral, it's wrong, it has to stop. And so he may not be worried about that. I am extremely worried about that. That is my primary goal running for Congress. This is our moment. We've witnessed an unprecedented level of increased spending, 58% since 2019, other than World War II. This is our only chance to reset that to a reasonable pre-pandemic level of spending. And again, I think you can do it, and the spending that we would eliminate, people wouldn't even notice. But you have to do the work, which takes time.
I think he's spot on here. You have to understand that we're looking at, under this bill, running massive, massive budget deficits in the very near future, even bigger than under baseline law. For example, according to the Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, the 2027 deficit will be more than 1/3 larger under this bill. So instead of the projected current number of 1.7 trillion, it will be a 2.3 trillion estimated deficit. That's insane. That's a huge, huge budget deficit. And trillions dollars more piled onto the backs of young people like myself, who will be paying off the interest for the rest of our lives, and onto generations that aren't even born yet. So my view on this has always been very simple. I understand that, like, maybe during a recession, you might want to run a small budget deficit to kind of stimulate the economy with tax cuts or different spending programs, but then you should run a surplus when you're not in a recession to balance it out over time, because it is, like Ron Johnson says, massively immoral to enjoy benefits today, which is what this spending is supposed to be. I understand that not all of it actually goes to benefits, to benefiting people. A lot of it doesn't. But this spending is supposed to be for things we want today. But we are passing the tab down to future generations. How would we look at parents who took out credit cards in their children or grandchildren's names, bought a bunch of stuff for themselves with it, and then let their grandkids and kids pay it off the rest of their lives? We'd be like, wow, those are terrible people. Very selfish, very unfair of them to do that. That is what Congress does when it runs these massive deficits and just piles on to the trillions and trillions of dollars of the national debt, which hurts the economy in a bunch of ways, and again has these massive interest payments that people will have to pay off for decades and decades to come. I do think that is immoral and wrong, and basically every Republican says they think the same, but then when they actually get into power, they go and blow massive holes in the deficit in the budget anyway. Another one who's speaking out on this is Senator Rand Paul, who is a strong fiscal hawk. He had this to say about this whole fiasco.
Biden spending levels. When March, virtually every Republican other than me, voted to continue the Biden spending levels, which are going to give us a $2.2 trillion deficit. Now, if you increase the debt ceiling $4 to $5 trillion, that means they're planning on $2 trillion this year and more than $2 trillion next year. That's just not conservative. So I've told them if they strip out the debt ceiling, I'll consider, even with the imperfections, voting for the rest of the bill. But I can't vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. There's got to be someone left in Washington who thinks debt is wrong and deficits are wrong and wants to go in the other direction. The idea that we're going to explode deficits, and the projections are now looking at over $3 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years, I think is just, not a serious proposal. Somebody has to stand up and yell, the emperor has no clothes, and everybody's falling in lockstep on this. Pass the big, beautiful bill. Don't question anything. Well, conservatives do need to stand up and have their voice heard. This is a problem we've been facing for decades now, and if we don't stand up on it, I really fear the direction the country is going.
I agree with him. Again, I mean, I understand that they have a very thin majority in Congress, so they can't get a perfect bill, and they have to try to appeal to like moderate squish Republicans and the Freedom Caucus or whatever, but they have to be able to do better than this. A bill that's expected, according to the Wall Street Journal, to add $3 trillion or so to the deficit over a decade, when they ran on balancing the budget entirely and ending budget deficits, which of course was never realistic, but you could at least not increase them by that much, couldn't you? Is that really too much to ask? Most Republicans are just scared of Trump. He wants to pass this bill. He's attacking people who don't go along with it. I give credit to the few out there like Ron Johnson and Rand Paul, who apparently actually believe at least some of the things they say they believe and are willing to take a stand, even if it's going to get them angry tweets from the White House. It's been one of the great sorrows of my political career as somebody who's quite fiscally conservative to just watch 99% of Republicans lie to my face for years that they were fiscal hawks, that they believed in free market capitalism, that they were going to balance the budget, that they were going to do all these things and then get in power and give massive handouts to corporations and special interests they align with, carve massive loopholes in the tax code for special interests that benefit them, and refuse to meaningfully cut spending or roll back these entitlement programs that are driving our country into this massive fiscal crisis. Maybe I was dumb and naive for ever believing any of them. I always knew some of them had to be full of it, but I didn't realize that it was basically all except a handful. What do you guys think? Do you support the big, beautiful bill? I certainly don't. I understand you can't get everything you want, but you have to be able to do better than this monstrosity, if you ask me. But I definitely want to hear from you guys, so let me know what you think in the comments. Up next, we're going to talk about what I think is probably the most insidious and immoral thing from the entire Trump presidency so far. I think it was very clear, at least to me, that Biden's border policies were a catastrophe. We had a huge border crisis. Border states were overrun. You had millions of people coming here illegally without proper vetting, without order, and it was an absolute disaster. And Trump was elected with a mandate to sort out this disaster. And to be clear, he did. His policy changes at the border have resulted in extremely low levels of illegal border crossings and apprehensions. He's seemingly solved the border crisis with his policies. But he's done more than that. He's gone above and beyond in some ways that I didn't expect, and that I do think violate some pretty basic aspects of human rights and constitutional law. For example, I'm going to play you a clip of the Cato Institute's David Beer on MSNBC. And yes, I know it's MSNBC, but he's a right-wing libertarian guy from the Cato Institute, which is not a liberal source whatsoever. And he outlines some details from a new report about how the Trump administration incarcerated roughly 50 legal immigrants in an El Salvador prison with no trial and no charges, even though they never broke any immigration laws at all. Take a listen to him summarizing his report, and then I'll get into the details.
The Trump administration expelled, really rendered these individuals from Venezuela to El Salvador to a prison. They are imprisoning them at our expense. Again, no charges, no trials, not even a hearing before their removal. We went through and we documented at least 50 cases. 50 out of the 250 who were sent, 50 cases of people who came legally to the United States. They never violated any immigration law. And the whole premise of the administration's argument here is people came here illegally, so they have no due process. They have no rights whatsoever under the Constitution. These people came legally at the invitation of our government. They were detained and then ultimately expelled without a hearing, without due process. And that's the concern here for everyone who whether you are a U.S. citizen, whether you're a legal permanent resident, whether you're someone else who's come here legally. This is what the administration's advertisement to the world of what America does to people who come to our country. We don't give you any rights. And that should be not only scare immigrants who are coming here, but Americans who are traveling abroad, because we will have no right to object when a country does that to a U.S. citizen traveling abroad to an authoritarian country who does these kind of things.
So just hearing him describe it like that is astounding. It is wrong to incarcerate people in prisons without charges or trial. I even believe that if they're illegal immigrants, I think they're entitled to basic due process, but especially if they're legal immigrants, like refugees or people who got permission to enter the country, we are violating their human rights by sending them to and paying for them to be in El Salvador prisons with horrible conditions when we haven't even convicted them in a court of law. If they truly are the horrible people that Trump says that they are, then I want them imprisoned, absolutely, but you still owe every human being a basic level of human rights. And that includes a right to habeas corpus, to know the charges against you, a right to a trial where crimes against you are proven. They could have just deported people who were here illegally. They sent a lot of these people to countries that aren't where they're from, not their home nation, and then they didn't just deport them, they paid for them to be imprisoned, which is like effectively the same thing as us imprisoning them, which we couldn't do without a trial or charges, and I don't really see how it's any different just because we pay another country to do it. I gotta give you guys more details from this Cato Institute report because it's honestly one of the most horrifying things I've read in a long time. 50 plus Venezuelans imprisoned in El Salvador came to the US legally, never violated immigration law. These people came to the United States with advanced US government permission, were vetted and screened before arrival, violated no US immigration law, and the US government turned around and disappeared them without due process to a foreign prison. It is paying the Salvadorian government to continue to keep them incarcerated. So this is all sourced and all vetted. These are factually true claims, and we are paying for the Salvadorian government to imprison these people, but never gave them charges or a trial. To say nothing of the really horrifying conditions in some of these prisons that I think violate the Eighth Amendment and the prohibitions on cruel and unusual punishment if we were to ever do them here in the US, and we're just contracting it out to another country. I oppose this even for illegal immigrants, but it's exponentially even more horrifying that they're doing it to legal immigrants as well. These legal immigrants include a temporary visa holder and 4 men who were authorized to travel through the US refugee program. The government vetted these refugees abroad and concluded that they would face persecution, letting them resettle in the United States. The other 45 legal immigrants scheduled appointments using the CPB-1 app through which they were permitted to seek entry. Among those with appointments, 24 were paroled into the United States where they could live and work legally for up to 2 years, while the other 21 were detained at the port of entry. A lot of these people don't exactly seem like supervillains on the surface either. The men were workers, construction laborers, pipe installers, cooks, delivery drivers, a soccer coach, a makeup artist. We talked about the makeup artist on the show before. A mechanic, a veterinarian, a musician, and an entrepreneur. Most of those who were released quickly found jobs in the United States. A majority of the men are fathers. Altogether, the men were trying to support 44 children. The US government did not inform their families, lawyers, or anyone else of their impending imprisonment at US government expense in a Salvadorian prison known for torture and other abuses that would be illegal inside the United States. Agents simply disappeared them without charge or trial or even acknowledgement, which is rightly considered a crime against humanity. That is astounding to me, that these people were sent to this prison and their families and lawyers weren't even told where they were sent or why or how to get in contact with them and whatnot. Can anyone really defend that? Even if you broadly support Trump being tough on the border, deporting illegal immigrants, all of this is just so remarkably, incredibly above and beyond to me. Now, the Trump administration says that these people are all confirmed members of gangs and criminal enterprises and terrorist organizations, but they don't have a whole lot to back up those claims, as this report makes clear. Investigations by the New York Times, Bloomberg, and CBS News have all found that few of the imprisoned men have any criminal record. All these legal immigrants denied gang membership, and only 2 appear to have had a U.S. criminal conviction of any kind, both for minor drug offenses. About 24 of the legal immigrants were detained immediately at the port of entry where they were authorized to seek entry, so there is no possibility that they demonstrated any gang ties or committed any crimes inside the United States. Most, at least 42, were labeled as gang members primarily based on their tattoos, which Venezuelan gangs do not use to identify members and are not reliable indicators of gang membership. According to court documents, DHS created a checklist to determine that heavily weights dressing like a gang member using, quote, gang signs and, most critically, tattoos. No criminal conviction, arrest, or even witness testimony is required. Wow. Call me crazy. Call me a woke lib if you want. I don't think we should be sending people to prisons based on what tattoos they have. That's not exactly an exact science, and lots of people in the Latin American world have all kinds of tattoos. Doesn't mean they're in a gang or a criminal, and that we can just skip the whole charges, trial, evidence thing. I think this is a violation of human rights, and I also think it's a violation of their constitutional rights, because even though they're not citizens, the Constitution applies to non-citizens as well. It very clearly says in the 5th and 14th Amendments, persons are entitled to due process of law and cannot be deprived of liberty by the U.S. government without due process. And in this case, they're being sent to prisons by the U.S. government, contracted out with no trial, no charges, and based on what tattoos they have. I don't know how anybody can think that's anything other than a blatant violation of human rights and constitutional rights. I'm really horrified by it. And I say that as somebody who is in many ways supportive of many of Trump's immigration policies. I want border security. I want to stop the flow of illegal immigration. I think criminal illegal aliens should be deported who actually are in gangs, who do come here and commit crimes. But to just be rounding people up like this and condemning them to these horrific fates with so little process or evidence or fairness, I think is a really ugly and evil thing to do. And I think it will have real ramifications for the U.S. economy. People are not going to want to come here as tourists. People are not going to want to send their students here to come to our colleges and our universities if they really think that people who are here legally can have their rights violated in this egregious manner. It's not moral, it's not right, and it's not in America's best interest long term to send this kind of message to the world. That's my take. If some of you guys disagree, I want to hear from you in the comments. Please do explain why. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please do make sure you're subscribed. If you aren't yet, do hit that like button before you go. And with that, we'll talk again real soon.